Hello, AP students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have your notes for Chapter 2, Research Methods, Part 3. And we're going to talk about sources of bias in research. So, we're going to take a look at some of these varieties of biasness in research. And as we go along, make sure you're writing things down. But there are a lot of emotionally loaded topics that can bring out biasness and affect the ways that experimenters design their studies or collect their data or interpret their results. So we're going to start with personal bias. This is a situation in which the researcher's personal beliefs affect the outcome of the study, and that can be their individual beliefs, preferences, assumptions that they have, or even prejudice. Sometimes it's not always obvious that an individual is holding such a bias. Sometimes this can cause scientists to notice only the evidence confirming their own hypothesis. So in a way, it's kind of like confirmation bias in a sense, where that can come from. There is also expectancy bias. This is a situation where researchers allow their expectations to affect the outcome of a study. So it may be maybe such a thing as like this affects like observations when an observer expects or they want to look for certain outcomes. So, for example, students are in time groups of rats through a maze, and the experimenter could tell some students that their rats were really, really bright and exceptional. Other students might have overheard this, and then they thought that maybe their rats were slow. And for some reason, maybe the people who thought their rats were brilliant outperformed those people who had duller rats. So needless to say, we need to watch out for that because it can lead to erroneous conclusions. And it can also be expensive because research isn't cheap necessarily. All right. We can have a double-blind study. And typically, double-blind studies are good as a way to kind of watch out for the research. Both the researcher and the subject are really uninformed about the true nature of the independent variable. And in a way, it can control expectancy biasness because nobody kind of really knows what's going on here. Typically, this is used in drug studies, so you may have the real pharmaceutical that's being used, and we have placebos, and then obviously a control group where people are not really exposed to anything. But in a way, this would kind of reinsure the fact that whatever that new pharmaceutical is, it is actually doing what it's supposed to do. Hindsight bias. This is a situation or a tendency upon hearing about the research findings to think that you knew it all along. Sometimes we call this like the Monday morning quarterback. This idea that, yeah, I knew it. But typically it's after you hear the results. And for some reason, this doesn't necessarily just have to apply to the world of research. It pretty much can apply to a lot of different things in our everyday life. All right, experimental bias or experimenter bias. This is the unconscious tendency for the researcher to treat the control and the experimental groups differently in hopes of confirming that hypothesis. Sometimes it's not the hope. Sometimes they just do it and they don't even realize it. All right. Response or participant bias. Sometimes this is kind of unusual, but it does happen where there's a tendency for the subject to behave a certain way because they think maybe they know what the research is about. So in a way, they don't act normally. They're kind of trying to do things the right way. In a way, it's kind of like always kind of giving the politically correct or socially desirable answer in hopes that that's going to help the study. This may have a tendency to bias the total outcome of the research just because they're being overly helpful. Others, the demand characteristics. These are clues about the purpose of the study. Subjects use the clues to respond appropriately. Has a little bit to do with the participant bias. The last one is the Hawthorne effect. This is selecting a group of subjects on whom the experiment will affect their performance, um, regardless of what is done to those individuals. All right. Thank you very much.